This is the Legacy of the Industrial Revolution, Objective 3, and this is one of my favorite topics. It's about the legacies of the Industrial Revolution in the West. I think the main reason that I enjoy this one so much is just because I used to play with a lot of tractors when I was a kid. And really, the Industrial Revolution that was happening in a very large capacity in the northeastern Rust Belt in the late 1800s, and on a more limited capacity in the South during the 1800s, really starts to hit in the West during this time as well, as the farm turns into more of a farming factory. Now, how did this happen? Well, first of all, you have to understand that prior to industry becoming really big in the East, farmers used to raise their own food, they used to make their own clothes, and they used to basically barter for necessities. They really didn't spend a whole lot on major production items or anything like that. But once industry really starts to pick up in the East, people are looking for all sorts of products. Mass production of steel, mass production of kerosene and later gasoline, the mass production of railroads, the mass production techniques that would eventually be perfected by Henry Ford. All of these things led to tools that farmers could use to allow them to concentrate on cash crops by 1900. So from 1850 to 1900, we do see an industrial revolution on the farm as well. Now, the cash crops were typically things like wheat and corn. These were easy crops to sell for high prices. Farmers started buying more and more equipment and buying more and more land, and they would basically plow under a lot of other things to grow more and more wheat and corn, the things they could sell for high profits. Now, they'd use those profits to buy food and clothes and necessities at general stores and things like that, and industrialization really makes farmers a lot more of the consumer economy. Now, the problem with this is going to come a lot later on in the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. Because what happens, and it's also going to become a problem with debt in the populist movement of the 1890s, because, buying all this equipment and eventually getting to a point where all the stuff that they're producing in terms of food is not necessarily needed is going to hurt them, hurt the economy by the 1890s, and by the 1930s, leave the soil just totally wrecked after decades of plowing stuff up to grow wheat and corn. More on both of those things in future lessons. But in the meantime, in terms of the industrialization of this time, farmers now were more industrialists in some ways than they were farmers. The main reason for this is because they were conducting business with banks all the time. They were conducting business with railroads, and they were conducting business with manufacturers. They were doing these things to produce more and more agricultural product. And as a result, getting the high prices they were getting for wheat and corn, they were starting to buy some very, very expensive equipment. Now, there were three things in particular in the late 1800s that became especially prominent. As you guys know, before the Civil War, Cyrus McCormick had come up with the mechanical reaper. John Deere had come up with the horse-drawn steel plow. But after the Civil War, and as things started to industrialize, we started to see steam engines to drag plows and seeders. You can see here, there's a place for someone to sit, actually this whole time, usually be one of the kids or a farmhand, who would sit on the back and provide some weight so that these discs could go and these plows could go a little farther into the ground and till things up a little better. Those old steel plows, or those old steam plows, I should say, used to work really well, and nowadays they're considered parts of antiquity, but still pretty cool to look at if you're a tractor geek like me. The second major invention of this time was the Twine Binder. Now, I know you can't find very many good pictures of a twine binder. This was considered a Cyrus McCormick model, in later years, or after he had passed away, I should say. Remember, McCormick had come up with the original mechanical reaper, and this was a play off of that. The reaper was basically a giant lawnmower, old-style lawnmower, with the rotating blades that would pick up all the wheat and everything like this. Well, the twine binder would pick the stuff up and wrap it up. And in some cases, twine binders are used by different farmers still today. Probably on a little more smaller scale, because the thing you really want to get is this. This is the combine, and these things are just cool. Now, I want you to be aware of something. The twine binder came into existence in the 1870s. In the 1880s, the combine was the first thing that came into play. And if you don't know what a combine is, it's basically a combination of reaper and thresher. It basically picks the stuff up, threshes it out, you know, that type of thing. Now, combines today are pretty elaborate pieces of machinery that, if you're not careful with them, can break down fairly easy, as far as I know. Combines allow for even more agricultural production than we've ever seen in our history, as they reap the wheat and thresh it out, and even have big enough cabs to bring a buddy along if you want to, just in case you're bored with the work at hand. Never driven one of these things. Always thought it'd be kind of cool to drive one of these things. When I was a kid, I actually had a little toy of one of these things. I've just always been fascinated by reapers and threshers, but, you know, whole other story. But I'm always fascinated by combines. But those type of combines that I played with as a kid were not the type of combines that they had, obviously, in the 1800s. This is a combine of the late 1880s, and the typical combine usually had to be drawn by 20 to 40 horses. Now think about that for a second. In order to make the old-style combines work, you'd have to come up with a bigger fleet of horses. I mean, really, when you think about it, it's kind of shocking to see this many horses pulling one thing. But before they had the modern version of the combines today, you really had no choice but to do it this way. So the farm was starting, in a lot of ways, to turn into a factory. And there was one other aspect that was changing as well, and that was the Bonanza Farm. As industry started to become bigger and bigger out east, and mechanical products for farming started to become bigger and bigger out west, farmers found that they could produce so much wheat and corn and grain and things like that that they bought huge plots of land. They would take former small farms, buy them from the small farmers, and consolidate them into one huge one. This was really kind of a horizontal integration model, very similar to what Rockefeller had done out east and what Carnegie had done a little bit of too. They basically bought up the companies or the businesses around them that were in the same industry. Well, Bonanza farmers were kind of the Rockefellers and the Carnegies of the West. They got fabulously wealthy by buying out small farmers around them and creating these huge collective farms, these huge tracts of land. Now, I really couldn't find any decent pictures of it, so I'm cheating a little bit here. This is from the old TV show Bonanza, oddly enough. And this right here is supposed to be the Bonanza Farm in the middle of Nevada, near modern-day Lake Tahoe, called the Ponderosa, if you ever watch reruns of the old TV show. That Bonanza Farm right there led to the fictional Cartwright family becoming some of the wealthiest people in the region, because they just bought up all the small farms around them and created one huge Bonanza Farm that could ranch or produce grain or whatever the case may be, but just produce a high yield of agricultural product. And that was the basic idea. By 1900, America was known as the world's breadbasket and butcher shop, passing Russia and some other areas as well. We were basically to a point where if we weren't the ones feeding the world, we were pretty close. And a lot of it had to do with the industry and the mechanization of the agriculture out west. Okay, that's a good look at that. So thanks again for listening, and we'll talk to you on the next one.